The phone call ended with a polite sigh, and the office door clicked like a final verdict. Diane stood in the corridor, badge dangling, the walls too white to hold any mercy. Corporate realignment, they said, and then the boy appeared, bright and replaceable. She had taught him once, let him suture a small wound under her steady hands. Now, he took her desk with a grin that didn't know history. She boxed her books, the framed full, the stethoscope polished by years of trust. Her fingers trembled at the photo of a mare she'd delivered in a midnight storm. In the parking lot, the sky felt like glass, and her breath scratched its surface. She sat behind the wheel and watched the clinic shrink in the mirror. Some losses make no sound, they just turn the world down. Home was a museum of conversations avoided and calendars unchanged. Mark sat at the kitchen table, already dressed in distance and decision. "I signed the papers," he said, as if discussing whether in passing. Silence thudded between them like shoes left by the door forever. She nodded, because words would have drowned in that room. Later, cardboard swallowed her life in square gulps and dusty sighs. She labeled one box winter, another someday, one simply don't. On the counter, her ring made a small metallic moon and rolled. It stopped against the base of a mug that read "Trust the process." She laughed, a single bark that tasted like rust. Night sank hard, and sleep kept its distance on stiff legs. She scrolled past cheaper pills, brighter promises, louder gurus. Somewhere, a video of a colt learning to stand shook her chest. His knees wobbled, and he fell, then tried again with wet eyes. She whispered, "Get up," and startled herself by meaning it. At dawn, she opened the freezer and found the last bag of berries. She made a smoothie that tasted like stubborn summer in October. On the table lay a local paper folded to the classifieds. A smudged square announced "Property Montana Creek Barn, needs love." The word creek ran like water through the cracks of her resolve. She circled the ad and dialed with fingers cold as fence wire. The voice said the land was tired but honest, the barn leaning, the gates stubborn. Diane closed her eyes and saw a field breathing under low sky. She saw hooves, dust, a shadow with ears pricked like questions. "Hold it for me," she said, and her pulse answered yes. In the driveway, she loaded boxes while the sun learned to be brave. The truck coughed awake and settled into a faithful grumble. Neighbors waved the way people wave at departures they don't understand. She set the photo of the foal on the passenger seat, a compass of eyes. Behind her, the house watched without blinking and let her go. Highway lines unspooled like thread on a wound she couldn't see. Diane drove through states that wore their names in long winds. Gas stations floated by with neon halos and burnt coffee halos. She counted mile markers like beads, a rosary for the restless. Storms gathered, changed their minds, and moved on without her. At a rest stop, a toddler studied her boots with solemn science. "Are you a horse doctor?" he asked, already believing she was. "I am," she said, and watched the words sit tall in her mouth. His mother smiled, tired, grateful for the small wonder of strangers. Diane carried that smile back to the cab like a pocket flame. At night, motels offered thin towels and thicker silence. She dreamed of a black horse standing knee-deep in moonlight. He turned toward her with eyes that held weather and memory. When she reached out, her hand became a halter of light. She woke with her heart cantering. Sheets twisted like reins. Morning coffee tasted like resolve, bitter and absolutely necessary. She ate eggs that squeaked on the fork and didn't complain. The news above the counter murmured disasters in moving captions. Somewhere in the ticker came a story about a seized herd. Words like neglect and auction looped ropes around her ribs. She called the seller again while trucks hummed like bees. The woman said the creek ran even in August, silver as rumor. "The barn needs a spine," she added, almost apologizing to the wood. Diane pictured beams like tired shoulders wanting one good reason. "I can give them that," she said, surprising them both. By the time mountains rose, the sun was a coin wearing thin. Shadows stacked in the folds of the land, cool and patient. She rolled down the window, let pine and cold braid her hair. Some distances don't measure miles, but the will to cross them. She crossed anyway, breath by breath, mile by mile. At a ridge, the road bent and finally introduced the valley. A thin ribbon of water flashed once, then hid like a shy child. A barn leaned at an angle that implied stories and injuries. Fence posts stood like old men in church, stiff and faithful. Diane parked, listened, and the land answered with quiet. She stepped out, and the ground felt like a held note. Wind touched her cheek with the glove of early winter. From somewhere behind the cottonwoods came a soft snort. 2 ears rose above the grass, then vanished with a ripple. Her heart lifted, then braced, like a hand reaching for wire. The gate moaned when it moved, an animal remembering its name. Hinges argued, then relented the way pride sometimes does. Diane pushed through with a grunt and a promise under breath. The path beyond was freckles of frost and old hoofprints. Each print was a question she wanted to answer gently. Inside the barn, dust turned to slow galaxies in her headlamp. Spiderweb lace held the corners like careful handwriting. A swallow's nest clung to a beam, stubborn against weather. She smelled hay ghosts, copper rain, and the ache of wood. Still standing, she whispered, and the barn kept the secret. She toured the fences, counting splits like years in an old face. The creek flashed silver, then slid back under woods and willow. A rusted trough held rain that reflected a sky learning blue. In that mirror, her face looked older and strangely unafraid. A hawk traced an idea above her, then let it glide. At the far pasture, grass broke into whispers at her knees. Something watched with the patience of a distant campfire. A black shape shifted, then steadied, carved from shadow, ears forward, nostrils thin, a question drawn in muscle. Diane stopped, hands open, voice a soft, low river. Easy, she said, and the word set gently on the wind. The horse flicked an ear as if filing the sound for later. A scar mapped his shoulder, like lightning caught mid. He stepped once, back, the way memory sometimes retreats. She did not follow. She waited and let silence work. Footsteps crunched behind her, boots, careful, measuring respect. A neighbor in a brimmed hat lifted 2 fingers in greeting. Name's Cole, he said, eyes the color of sunburnt straw. Been keeping half an eye so coyotes don't get ideas. He glanced at the horse. That one don't let anyone close. They stood side by side, not pretending to know much yet. Cole spat into grass and drew a line with his boot. Storm, he said, like it was a verdict and a prayer. Came out of trouble and brought the weather with him. Diane nodded. Then we'll wait for the sky to clear. She walked back to the barn with the rhythm of purpose. A list formed, shingles, posts, feed, blankets, time. Her palms itched for a hammer, a brush, a pulse to read. She wrote sanctuary on a scrap, then pinned it to a beam. Storm watched from the hill, a comma not ready to end. Morning arrived smelling like iron and frostbit grass. Diane carried a bucket, not as a bribe but as a promise. Grain ticked like soft rain, and apples shone like small suns. She stopped outside his sphere and let the air decide. Storm stood, carved from patience, and storms survived. His eyes were old roads, full of ruts and sudden beauty. A bird flashed past. He didn't flinch, only calculated. When she shifted weight, he measured the math of escape. Her voice stayed low, a river smoothing stones by staying. Take your time, she said, and meant the whole winter. He lowered his head 1 inch, then another careful inch. Steam feathered from his nostrils like unpracticed forgiveness. She placed the bucket down and stepped back, palms open. He stepped forward, tasted grain, listened to apples breathe. A breeze licked his mane. The world did not end. When the apple came out, he lifted and paused mid. Her hand did not chase. Gravity did the patient work. Lips touched skin, velvet shocked with the charge of trust. She swallowed a gasp, didn't move, let wonder stand still. He chewed slowly, as if reading a difficult page. Cole watched from the fence with the boredom of concern. Most just push, he said. You're doing the opposite. Pushing is for doors, she murmured, and he snorted once. The black horse flicked his ear toward their quiet argument. Wind combed the grass, choosing neutrality as policy. As shadows shortened, storms circled once and tested distance. Diane stepped away, offering him a wider circle of choice. He followed, keeping the space honest, exquisitely exact. Their orbits aligned, imperfect, promising, mathematically kind. A halter waited on the post and did not hurry anyone. When he finally exhaled into her sleeve and stood, she knew this was a door that opened from the inside only. She brushed his neck with strokes that spelled no demands. Hair gathered in soft drifts, a quiet snowfall of black. He stayed, and staying was the miracle disguised as ordinary. The hammer found a rhythm and taught the barn a song. Nails went in like decisions finally made at dawn. Boards settled under her hands, grateful as old dogs. Blisters rose, proof that skin can remember new work. Sweat salted the cold and made it honest. Between repairs, she found artifacts left by forgetting. A child's marble nested in dust like a patient planet. A bridle hung with mildew and stories nobody signed. In a drawer, a brittle envelope labeled Sanctuary Rules. Inside, one rule only: kindness first, then everything else. At noon, she sat with soup that warmed without poetry. Storm grazed nearby, pretending not to watch her spoon. Clouds ambled across the sky, stubborn but harmless. In the steam she saw the clinic halls, their tiled indifference. In the silence she heard soft hooves, claiming the present. Afternoon brought a knock that startled the hinges. A woman stood there with a thin mare and thinner hope. She was left in a field, the stranger said, not accusing. Diane took the lead rope with hands she trusted again. Welcome, she said, to all three of their hearts. Storm lifted his head and measured the new arrival. He stepped closer, then stopped, a sentinel learning hospitality. The mare shivered, but her eyes held a stubborn wick. Diane laid a blanket, checked pulse, found a flicker. Stay, she whispered to life, and life listened once more. Evening poured blue into the creek until silver woke. She hung a lantern that hummed like a quiet promise. On a fallen beam, she found an old wooden sign, letters peeled but legible, Silver Creek Sanctuary. She brushed the dust. The name inhaled and sat tall. She nailed the sign above the barn door, hand steady. Storm snorted, the mare sighed, the land approved. Diane leaned back, spine against wood, breath against stars. Tomorrow would ask for money, fences, hay, 1,000 things. Tonight, she had a name, a beginning, and 2 beating reasons. Dawn slipped quietly through the slats of the rebuilt barn. Frost glittered on the hay like sugar over old bread. Diane moved among the stalls with a mug that steamed purpose. Storm watched her, his breath ghosting against the chill. The world was slow, deliberate, ready for something unnamed. Outside the gate, a truck rattled up the dirt road. A deputy stepped out with papers and a nervous horse trailer. Another one, he said, voice low, as if carrying sorrow. Inside was a chestnut mare with eyes like broken amber. Her ribs told the story before words had the courage to. Diane signed, though her hands trembled against the clipboard. The mare flinched at touch, but not from Diane's voice. Storm shifted in his paddock, pacing, studying the newcomer. It was as if he sensed the wound and the will behind it. The sanctuary took another breath and made room for pain. She worked until her back spoke in knots and whispered protests. Steam rose from buckets, from breath, from her own resolve. The mare ate slowly, trusting one bite at a time. Diane stayed until the moon claimed the last word of daylight. Storm stood at the fence line, silent witness, eyes reflecting flame. That night she slept on straw beside the new arrival. Dreams folded over her like blankets, still learning her shape. She dreamed of open fields and hooves drumming in gratitude. She dreamed of laughter, her own echoing like new rain. When she woke, the world smelled faintly of second chances. In the morning, the mare pressed her muzzle against Diane's shoulder. It was small, but enough to redraw the map of her heart. Storm whinnied once, low and approving, before turning away. The sun burned through fog, gold outlining what could be. Some mornings are prayers disguised as chores. Diane stepped into the cold and whispered her plan aloud. More stalls, more hands, more life. The words took root. Her voice carried over the creek, a vow the land believed. The century had found its rhythm, the rhythm of mending, and Storm, at the far end, nodded once, as if he'd heard. Snow arrived quietly, like forgiveness without fanfare. The fences wore lace. The roof held its breath under weight. Diane worked with her sleeves rolled, pulse steady with routine. Storm's coat gleamed darker against the pale morning hush. Every movement between them felt deliberate, measured, sacred. She brought him apples, but not everyday trust needs hunger. He greeted her with eyes that no longer fled from touch. When she brushed him, muscles twitched like sighs learning rhythm. The air between them grew gentler, almost conversational. Some silences no longer mean distance, they mean peace. One afternoon, a knock cut through the wind. A man with a camera stood there, hat tipped, grin, earnest. Saw your story in the local feed. Mind if I share it wider? Diane hesitated, wary of attention disguised as kindness, but Storm pressed close behind her, as if saying, it's time. The article went live the next morning, words soft and true. Vet turns abandoned ranch into refuge for horses. Pictures showed Storm's eyes catching sunlight like confession. Within days, envelopes arrived with notes, a few with checks, and one woman wrote, your story reminded me, I can start again. Volunteers began to appear, wrapped in wool and curiosity. A teenager with trembling hands, a widower with quiet grief. Each one found something unspoken in the rhythm of care. Diane guided them, not as a leader, but as a fellow survivor. The sanctuary began to hum with human breath again. Storm grew bolder, his hooves writing poetry in the snow. He followed Diane through chores, a shadow stitched with loyalty. When she stumbled on ice, he steadied her with a nudge. That small moment rewrote every cold morning she'd endured. Together, they became the sound of hope, learning to gallop. That night, Diane stood by the fire, reading another letter. It spoke of a veteran missing purpose, asking if he could visit. She looked at Storm, who stared into the dark pasture, listening. Yes, she whispered, both answer and prayer in one breath. Outside, the wind changed direction, and so did her life. They arrived in pairs, then in small flocks of need. A young girl afraid of her own voice, a man missing laughter, the barn filled with stories that didn't need to be told aloud. Diane welcomed each one with a mug, a blanket, a task. Storm observed, patient judge of sincerity and softness. She taught them grooming, feeding, breathing alongside horses. Hands that once trembled found rhythm brushing tangled manes. Voices learned to lower into calm instead of command. Storm accepted each approach with the grace of earned trust. It wasn't therapy, it was something older, deeper. Wordless. Cole helped mend the outer fence and stayed longer than planned. He told bad jokes and left coffee at her door without comment. Sometimes their laughter startled the birds into flight. It felt strange, this lightness sneaking into long days. Even grief needs a place to rest, she thought, and let it. One evening, a sleek car dusted the driveway with arrogance. A man in city shoes stepped out, smile, polished, eyes hungry. I represent donors, he said, voice sweet with ambition. He offered sponsorship on condition of naming rights. Diane smiled politely, the kind of smile that locks doors quietly. That night, she sat under a bulb swinging with the wind. Bills, feed, repairs, all danced like ghosts on the table. Storm stood outside, his breath fogging the glass. She met his eyes and felt the weight of what she'd built. Not for sale, she whispered, and meant every splinter of it. The next morning, the man was gone, leaving tire tracks and silence. Volunteers arrived, carrying hay and laughter in equal loads. The veteran wrote again, saying he'd be there by week's end. Diane smiled, the first true sunrise in her eyes for weeks. Storm neighed once, a trumpet of approval to the valley. Evening came with soft snow and a lantern's gentle hum. She walked the fence line, her boots whispering old prayers. Every stall she passed held breathing proof of purpose. In the last one, Storm waited, gaze steady, almost human. Tomorrow, more souls would arrive, and she would be ready. The wind woke before she did, wild and certain of itself. By breakfast, clouds bruised the horizon into warning. The volunteers hurried, gathering tools and buckets. Diane checked the fences twice, then a third time. The creek's voice grew louder, restless with coming rain. When the first flash cracked the ridge, Storm reared high. Lightning painted him white for a heartbeat, then gone. The herd scattered hooves drumming panic into the ground. Diane shouted names, her voice splitting in the gale. Water spilled from the creek, angry and unstoppable. She waded through mud and wind, ropes cutting her palms. The chestnut mare refused the stall, terror wider than reason. Easy, Diane cried, pushing against the force of nature itself. Storm appeared from the dark, wild eyes burning like signal fire. He nudged the mare, guided her toward safety with sheer will. A branch fell, splintering inches from her shoulder. Cole's truck lights flared through the sheets of rain. He ran to her, yelling, "You're out of your mind." "Then I'm not alone," she shot back, tugging a gate closed. Their laughter cracked the thunder, just long enough for breath. Hours later, the barn glowed gold against the storm's fury. Every horse safe, every stall filled with shaking relief. Diane leaned against Storm, both steaming in the lamplight. His heartbeat thudded against her arm, strong and unbroken. "I owe you," she whispered. He snorted, payment refused. Outside, the valley shimmered, half river, half memory. Fences lay down like soldiers done with orders. The creek sang lower now, exhausted and alive. Cole wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, eyes soft. "You've built more than fences here," he murmured. That night, thunder wandered off to other stories. The barn breathed in rhythm, with its living cargo. Diane sat beside Storm, her hand resting on his mane. Every pulse between them hummed of survival shared. Outside, Montana exhaled and dawn began its climb. Morning brought silence that felt too sharp to trust. Storm limped, his legs swelling with unseen damage. Diane's chest tightened, a storm of another kind rising. She knelt, examining the wound with trembling focus. "Not you," she whispered, plea more than statement. Cole fetched supplies while she cleaned the cut. Blood mixed with iodine, a reminder of old battles. Storm flinched but didn't pull away, loyalty in motion. Her voice steadied, professional mask cracking with fear. Every heartbeat of his echoed inside her ribs. The day stretched thin under the weight of waiting. Volunteers whispered prayers disguised as chores. Diane barely ate, her hands locked in the ritual of care. She wrapped, cooled, checked, whispered, repeated. Each minute was a negotiation with fate itself. Night dropped heavy, carrying the smell of rain again. Storm lay down, sides heaving like a tired tide. Diane slid to the ground beside him, forehead to flank. Her tears soaked into his coat. Salt meeting storm water. "Stay," she said, and the word trembled like glass. Memories of other losses crowded close, uninvited. Patience she couldn't save, promises life didn't keep. She'd learned to be strong, but never how to be helpless. Now the lesson arrived, cruel and sacred at once. She held on, not knowing what else to hold. Outside, the wind softened, a lullaby in disguise. Storm stirred, one eye blinking, slow as dawn. He breathed deep, a sound heavy with survival. Diane felt it, that subtle miracle of movement. Her breath synced to his, cautious, grateful, alive. When she finally closed her eyes, exhaustion claimed her. Cole found her at sunrise, curled beside the horse. Storm stood, limping but upright, shadow, tall and calm. Diane smiled weakly, voice barely more than a sigh. "See," she said, "he keeps his promises." When Diane woke, light spilled through the cracks, like grace. Storm stood steady, bandaged leg, trembling but defiant. Cole leaned on the stall door, grin small but bright. "You both made it," he said, voice thick with awe. Diane reached up, touched the horse's cheek, and exhaled hope. By noon, word had already spread across the valley. Volunteers poured in with casseroles, hay, and stories. Someone brought flowers, another brought silence and tears. They scrubbed stalls, mended fences, rebuilt what rain had taken. Silver Creek buzzed with gratitude louder than the wind. The veteran finally arrived, cane tapping rhythm on dirt. He watched Storm from a distance, hands stuffed with ghosts. "Mind if I just sit?" he asked, voice soft, frayed by memory. "Please," Diane said, pulling a stool into the sunlight. Together they watched the horse breathe, each finding calm. Later, the man whispered, "I haven't felt peace in years." Diane smiled, wiping sweat with the back of her sleeve. "That's what they do," she said. "They lend it to us a while." He nodded, eyes damp, watching Storm flick his tail. "Maybe peace is something you borrow until you can own it." The sanctuary changed that week, not in size, but in spirit. Children painted signs, veterans fixed gates, laughter grew roots. Someone played guitar in the evenings, off-key but honest. The barn lights glowed like a heartbeat after a long sleep. Even the air seemed to hum the tune of belonging. One afternoon, Diane found a letter in her mailbox. It was from the boy who had replaced her at the clinic. He wrote, "I see now what healing really means. I'm sorry." The paper blurred as she read it, rain or tears uncertain. She folded it once, slipped it into her coat, and whispered thanks. That night, under stars like new promises, she stood by Storm. His eyes mirrored the constellations without envy or fear. "I think we're becoming what we were meant to be," she said. He lowered his head, breath warm against her sleeve. The universe answered with the soft rustle of hay. The days grew longer, full of light and labor's rhythm. Diane measured time by feedings, sunrises, small victories. Storm's limp faded, replaced by a swagger of quiet pride. The sanctuary pulsed with stories it didn't need to explain. Even pain had learned how to belong. Then, one afternoon, a familiar truck crept up the road. Mark stepped out, thinner, older, carrying words like stones. "I saw the article," he said. "You built all this without me?" She nodded, arms crossed but heart calm as a lake. "Sometimes you have to lose the wrong life to find the right one." He looked around, seeing fences mended with more than nails. "I didn't know you had this kind of fight in you," he murmured. She almost smiled. "Neither did I, until I had to." Storm approached, ears flicked, protective but peaceful. Mark stepped back, reading his welcome correctly. They talked for an hour about things already buried. No accusations, no promises, just closure without ceremony. When he left, the road didn't echo with regret this time. The horizon swallowed his taillights like fading punctuation. Diane felt lighter, as if forgiveness had weight and wings. Days later, another visitor appeared unannounced. The young vet from the clinic, eyes unsure, hat in hand. "I was wrong," he said. "You should have stayed." She studied him, then smiled faintly. "No, I should have left sooner." Storm snorted, stamping once, sealing the conversation. The young man glanced at the horses, all softening his face. "Could I come by sometimes, to learn?" he asked quietly. "Only if you're ready to listen more than you speak," she replied. He nodded, humbled, and offered a genuine handshake. Storm watched, approving the exchange with regal silence. That evening, the valley bloomed in gold and forgiveness. Diane sat by the creek, the water's song steady and clean. She thought of endings that had become beginnings. Above her, the stars winked like knowing old friends, and for the first time, her heart felt entirely unclenched. Spring arrived, wrapped in the scent of wet earth and renewal. Foals danced near the fence line, their legs unsure but joyful. Diane's mornings filled with laughter, not labor alone. Volunteers multiplied, each finding purpose in rhythm. Silver Creek was no longer hers, it was everyone's now. The young vet returned weekly, notebook always half full. He asked questions about trust, not just treatment. Diane taught him the medicine that books forget to print. How to listen with your hands, how to see before fixing. He nodded, scribbling lessons his professors never gave. Cole expanded the barn, whistling tunes without melody. "Place needs more room for miracles," he said with a wink. Diane rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. He built, she planned, Storm supervised with noble disinterest. Together they built more than walls, they built belonging. Letters continued to arrive from strangers with stories. Some offered money, others memories, a few just hope. Each word became another beam in the sanctuary's spine. Diane read them aloud to Storm during quiet evenings. He'd flick his tail as if punctuating the good parts. Then came an invitation from the town council. They wanted her to speak about Silver Creek at the fair. Her knees trembled at the thought. Crowds had never been kind. Cole squeezed her shoulder. "Just tell the truth, it's enough." She took a breath and nodded. Truth was something she had plenty of. At the fair, people gathered in folding chairs and dusty sunlight. Diane stood beside a photo of Storm, proud and calm. She spoke not of tragedy, but of what rose after it. "We don't rescue animals," she said. "We rescue the parts of us that still want to try." The applause felt like a gentle wind at her back. That night, she returned home to find the sanctuary glowing. Volunteers had lit lanterns along the fence in her honor. Storm stood by the gate, mane silvered under the moon. "Looks like you're famous," she teased, touching his neck. He breathed deep, content, the sound of a heart at peace. Summer came wrapped in blue skies and wildflower scent. Banners fluttered, tables lined with pies and lemonade. The grand opening wasn't grand, just honest and warm. Families wandered the paddocks, laughter brushing the grass. Silver Creek felt more alive than it ever had before. Diane stood by the main gate, welcoming each new visitor. Children pointed, wide-eyed, at Storm's gleaming coat. He stood proud, allowing gentle hands and quiet awe. Cole manned the grill, pretending not to care about the fuss. Music drifted off-key, homemade, perfect. A journalist asked her what the place truly meant. Diane thought for a moment, eyes on Storm grazing nearby. "It means I survived," she said softly. "And so did hope." The words hung in the warm air like sunlight refusing to fade. People nodded because they understood without needing more. Late in the afternoon, a truck rolled up, dust in its wake. A young woman stepped out, tears already on her cheeks. In the trailer behind her, a gaunt horse shifted uneasily. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, trembling. Diane smiled gently. "You came to the right place." They led the horse out together, careful and patient. Storm approached slowly, ears pricked in recognition. The new horse relaxed, as if Storm had spoken first. Diane placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "Every broken thing," she whispered, "can still learn to stand." As evening fell, lanterns bloomed like small galaxies. The creek sang, the crowd hummed, laughter rippled. Storm and the new horse stood side by side, silhouettes of survival. Diane exhaled, every hardship rewritten into light. Silver Creek had officially become a home. When the last guest left, she walked the grounds alone. Crickets stitched their song through the cooling air. She paused at the old sign, wood-worn but proud. Her fingers traced the word sanctuary one last time. Some dreams, she thought, are better when they belong to everyone. Morning broke in silence too full to be empty. Mist hung low, wrapping the fields in quiet awe. Diane saddled Storm bareback, trusting him completely. They rode without direction, only instinct and morning light. The world unfolded, simple and enormous at once. Up on the ridge, wind tangled her hair like laughter remembered. Below, the sanctuary shimmered fences, neat barns alive. She saw volunteers waving, children chasing the dawn. Storm pawed the ground, eager for the open stretch ahead. "Go on," she said, and he did, a blur of freedom and forgiveness. The ride was not about speed, but surrender. Each stride erased a wound. Each breath rewrote the past. Diane leaned forward, tears torn free by wind and joy. Storm's mane whipped her face, soft as old affection. She didn't hold on. She simply trusted. When they finally stopped, the world felt still and new. She slid down, resting her forehead against his neck. "You saved me," she whispered, voice cracking with truth. Storm's tail swished gently, dismissing the formality. "Love doesn't need thank you, it needs presence." By the creek, she watched reflections dance in silver light. The mare rescued that day grazed near the veteran's chair. Laughter echoed the sound of healing disguised as life. Coal waved from the barn, hammer raised like salute. Everything she'd lost had turned into something worth keeping. As the sun climbed higher, the air shimmered with promise. The sanctuary pulsed, alive, imperfect, whole. Diane turned toward the wind, eyes bright, shoulders steady. Her heart beat in rhythm with hooves and horizon. At last, she belonged to herself and to the freedom she built. That night, stars gathered above like loyal witnesses. Storm stood in the pasture, black against the silver sky. She leaned on the fence, letting silence finish the story. "Sometimes," she said softly, "we rescue each other." The wind agreed, carrying her words forever through Silver Creek.